All right, everybody, if your meetings feel like they're a waste of time or the same few people always dominate the room, or even worse, you feel like when the meeting ends, nobody leaves clear on what actually happens next, you might be facing the fourth buy-in blocker, which Dave calls one-way communication. And in this final episode of our buy-in blocker takeover series from the incredible Dave Garrison, he breaks down what happens when leaders talk at people instead of listening for them. And most of it is unintentional. So they make the mistake of assuming they know what others mean. They respond to their own interpretation and they turn meetings into debates or echo chambers instead of understanding. So he actually, in this short and powerful episode, shows you why even simple words can mean wildly different things to different people, and where this leads to creating confusion, disengagement, and the worst, the death by updates, and why real buy-in requires more than just us communicating or speaking clearly. It requires listening deeply. Dave gives you, in this episode, a practical, no-cost playbook to fix it immediately, like in a matter of minutes. Like you finish the episode, you go to your next meeting, and your mind will be blown. And so you're going to learn how to mirror back what you heard, ask clarifying questions, validate without agreeing, and create the kind of trust that makes real conversation possible. So this is the final episode in the series of Dave so graciously taking over the podcast, which I loved. And so if you haven't listened to the overview of the blockers, purpose drift, blind tasks, or lone wolf leadership yet, go cue those up too, because each one of these is applicable to every single one of us. And use this one to turn your meetings from ping pong matches to actual places where buy-in is built and grows. So without further ado, let's get into the episode.
My friend George has invited me to share some game-changing insights about tapping into people's full potential most organizations never achieve. It's called buy-in. So let's define what buy-in is. It's what you see in Friday night lights in the football stands when everybody is cheering, hooting, hollering. They're using their full selves to support the team in an important goal that they share in common. And what happens Monday morning? Gets left in the parking lot. It's really sad because about half the employees in America are looking either actively or passively for another job. It's hard to put your whole self into the work to be done when you're looking for another gig. They are not bought in. They might be happy. So I'm not talking about happiness. I'm talking about being fully present and putting everything you've got into getting the important things done, the team being successful. Buy-in, simply put, is when everybody applies their full selves to getting stuff done. Hi, I'm Dave Garrison. I'm author of the USA Today bestseller, The Buy-in Advantage. And welcome to the Leadership Lounge, where we explore ideas that we learn from great leaders, and we get a chance to think about and talk about how to apply those great ideas in our organization. There are 4 common mistakes that block buy-in. Leaders do it unintentionally. I've never met a leader that wakes up in the morning and says, oh, today I'm going to block buy-in. You might remember these 4 buy-in blockers from our previous episodes. The first one, we talked about purpose drift. That's when people lose sight of the compelling purpose of the organization, and they don't use why it is we're doing all this in order to help them prioritize and make decisions. That's purpose drift. A couple episodes ago, we talked about blind tasks. That's when we ask people to do something without the context, and they say, okay, they're just doing it. They don't know why it's important. It's a blind task. It usually doesn't end well. Last episode was about lone wolf leadership, which is where the leader decides what's to be done, how it's to be done, and then just tells people how to do it without consulting other people. And they don't take advantage of the fact that other people's blind spots are different than your blind spots. And sometimes this applies to entire departments where they never consult with other departments, but their department's doing great, but the overall team, not so much. The fourth buy-in blocker is one-way communications. That's what we're going to dive into today. One-way communications is when I talk at instead of listen for. What happens quite naturally is we're so smart and we just have conversations all the time. In our mind, we're thinking about what the other person is saying, we're interpreting it, and we're thinking about our response while they're talking. So we don't really truly understand what they're saying. We understand what we think they mean. And that is sometimes a gulf that is huge. So we respond to what we think we heard, which is rarely what the other person actually said. Let me give you an example of that. So if somebody says the word chair, what do they mean? They could be talking about, and I ask teams this, I say, hey, think about the word chair. Tell me what you think of. They say, oh, my grandmother's chair. Oh, the kitchen chair. Oh, the chairman of the board. Oh, the chair in front of my TV, the lazy boy chair I like to go to on Saturday afternoons. So everybody has a different meaning for the same word. And when leaders assume they know what the other person means, meetings become debates, not understanding. So this one-way communication plays out when people feel like meetings are a waste of time, death by updates. Operations, tell us what you're doing. Finance, tell us what's going on. Hey, tell us what's going on in the warehouse. And that's great. And we think we're doing great service. And then when we get into an issue, then it becomes like watching a ping pong match because it's always the same people dominating the conversation in meetings. Have you ever realized that? The ones with the biggest ego, the biggest title, or the need to be heard. The rest of us sit and watch. And sometimes we hear from clients who are faithful to holding accountability meetings, but no one's clear on the next steps because of one-way communications. Good news, there is a solution, easy, no cost, no software to buy for one-way communications, and that's let's really sharpen up on listening and clarifying. So here's what that looks like. Authentic listening means you mirror back to the person what you think you heard them say. And I mean literally the words they used, not the meaning you make of it. So mirror back what you think you heard and then just humbly ask, did I get that right? Maybe you did, maybe you didn't. Then ask clarifying questions. Gee, when you said you want to improve, what does improve mean to you? What does that look like in this situation? And really understand what they mean. And then an important step is to validate. Validate does not mean you agree with their position. And sometimes this is hard when you think that their idea makes no sense at all. That's especially when you need to validate. Validate just sounds like, gee, you know what? If I had had your experiences, I would probably feel the same way. You're not agreeing. You're just saying, hey, you have the right to your opinion. And you're validating their opinion makes sense based on what they know, who they are, where they've been. So it's not judgment, it's just supporting them. When you validate somebody else, they're more able to hear you. Then, after you validate, you ask questions. What if you also considered this criteria or this checklist item? How would your answer change? Here's the key. Listening begets listening on their part. But if you just respond with judgment, it's not going to end well. If you just, that idea won't work. That's one-way communication. And what we know to be true is deep listening builds trust. But building trust requires vulnerability. Vulnerability in communication requires you to listen deeply and know in your heart and know the truth is that your opinion is just one truth and you don't need to be right if you want to get the best insights, the best answer, and the best conversation. So simple steps, authentic listening, mirror what somebody else says, ask clarifying questions, validate, and be okay having different ideas and asking questions instead of telling them, no, that's wrong. Just ask them, hey, you know what? If you also consider this point, how might it change your thinking? and build some trust. Give it a try. Let me or George and I know how it goes. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn if you want a guide to 45 questions that great leaders ask. Thanks for joining Leadership Lounge. We'll see you next time.